Greetings. Elon Musk manufactured a short squeeze last week in an interesting way. As a result, a savvy investor could have taken $10 to $1,000 in 48 hours because of how he did it. So, this is one of the items we're going to cover today. The second is that now that the Model 3 is starting to sell, and mostly based on uh, people that are Model S owners selling their vehicles first, a whole question is starting to arise as to how do you evaluate and manage the parts issues relative to being um, a Tesla owner, short and long term. Um, this is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time on our channel, please take time to like and subscribe. I have to admit, when I started doing this work with Tesla, I kind of wondered, what in the heck would you cover, um, after the initial what color the new car is, when is it coming out, etc. But I'm amazed at how Elon Musk continues to expand the envelope of things one could look at and discuss. And today is no different. I also wanted to note to you, again, please like and subscribe. We could use your help on Patreon. I'm actually wanting to also do a survey. One of the ways we help cover the bills is through advertising. So if we put ads in and you skip them, it results in there being no revenue to use to help build our channel. So what I wanted to encourage you guys to do is sort of note in your comments or texts um, what we should be thinking about relative to where to place ads and how many of them to do, because we really would appreciate your support by actually watching the ads that are placed with our channel rather than you just skipping them, because it's kind of teamwork to make the dream work. So my first, and finally I wanted to note, I can see you, Jan, Jerry, all my friends around the world that have joining me regularly. Um, I'm experimenting with which day to do our weekend podcast. If I do it early in the morning on Sunday, it's captured the most number of live viewers. And what you'll notice is that you'll be saying hello to me, etc. And a number of my viewers have asked that I wait for full responses till the end of the video. That way it doesn't interrupt the flow of the conversation that we're covering. So again, thank you for supporting us and being interested. We love the fact that we have a global following, and really appreciate your attention. So today's discussion is slightly, just a little bit illegal. The reason I say that is that I'm going to get kind of technical with terms, and I want you guys to take the time to study it, because if you do study it, it could be very lucrative. So in particular, what I wanted to cover today is there's a concept called a short squeeze. So basically what's happening is that Tesla stock is one of the most shorted in the market. Approximately 25% of its shares have been what are called bought short. So that means that there's a huge number of very rich hedge funds and individuals that believe Tesla's stock price will fall dramatically and possibly go to zero. And if that occurs, they make a ton of money. Here's where it gets kind of interesting, and why I decided to cover this week, even though we've covered it a little bit in the past and probably will cover it again in the future. Something really crazy happened, which is, if you go back 3 shows for us, I have an image there where Elon Musk on April Fool's Day, April 1st, put a note in about Tesla potentially looking at bankruptcy, not bankruptcy, but bankwuptcy with a W. And he was pointing, and what he was sort of implying is that he was working really hard on the Model 3, and that the numbers, nothing was working out. So Tesla was likely to miss the numbers dramatically that it was supposed to produce, this resulting in a chain of events, including there wouldn't be enough cash to service the debt, and the lack of debt service is all of a sudden going to result in Tesla having to sell a ton of shares to stay in business, and that ends up destroying the entire value of everything that they've built up. So I wanted to bring this sort of conversation forward because as I was thinking through our preparation for this week's show, I noticed there was a very strange set of data points. The first is that last week on Friday, a friend of mine happened to mention that there's something called a 200 put on Tesla that was selling for $10. And what that meant is that on a short term basis, if Tesla's stock price had dropped to from the low was 244, I believe, down to 200 in 2 or 3 days, the value of that put would have gone from $10 to somewhere around 500 in a 24-hour period. Now, I thought this through and I was like, wow, that's crazy. And so this was a Friday in a discussion on CNBC. By Sunday, Elon Musk has put this April Fool's joke, if you will, out regarding bankwuptcy, and the potential for Tesla going there was sort of implied. And he picked up the themes related to the fact that there was a downgrade in addition to all these other news about missing numbers and needing to raise capital that would possibly destroy Tesla. What this resulted in was the next day on a Monday morning, um, the stock price started falling to its recent lows. And there was a wait to find out what the news would be on the stock. Tesla then came out with numbers and announced that they had produced 2,020 vehicles as of Tuesday morning. So as you'll see, the stock price rallied from about 244 into the 280s. And then the next day, it further rallied from the 280s to 305. Now, what I want you guys to look at on this chart is the fact that instead of purchasing a 200 put, if you had purchased what's called a 300 call for about 10 bucks, you would have managed to put in perhaps $10 and come back with, you know, $4,000 to $5,000 in 48 hours. Um, and so I just wanted to mention to you guys because part of being involved with Tesla as an owner, a potential owner, someone wanting to see the change it affects, is understanding how the stock works, why, and where it might look kind of ugly, but it also might be a buying opportunity of your life. So I have to admit, and you guys are going to bust me on this, but one of my fantasies that I sit out there with is, for giggles, if when Tesla fell to 244, you had purchased $1,000 worth of 300 calls, you would now have somewhere around $50,000 in 2 days worth of cash, and you can use that to buy your Tesla. So I want to just encourage you guys to consider learning about options and equity options related to Tesla as much as you can, because with how things are working as the Trump announcements are made, I think you're going to see huge volatility. And if you choose to ride the Tesla train hard, I think you could make a great deal of money. I wanted to mention to you there's a book called The Black Swan, and it'll give you a better idea how all this works and help fill in a bunch of the gaps that I won't be able to by answering questions, etc. But it's great for you guys to learn about this because I'm only putting up 1,000. There are people with enough money to put 10 or 20 grand up on Tesla for that call and pull down $1 million in 2 days. And so when you have that potential to earn that kind of money, that's what really could get your attention, and all the effort you've made to understand Tesla and what's going on gets rewarded by your ability to understand the investment climate you're in and what's occurring. Now, I thought it was bad enough that Elon Musk had set these guys up in claiming he was thinking about bankruptcy, and then now an interesting thing was happening with the hedge funders because they were like, well, are they going bankruptcy? Is this a problem? You know, have we really made a lot of money? Should we buy more, if you will, puts on the company based on this April Fool's announcement that he made on Monday morning? And so there are a lot of people who were hoping the stock price would fall that were sitting there waiting for that money to come into their account. And what happened? The stock rises by 60 points in 2 days. Now, part of the process of how our short squeeze works is that there are a bunch of people who've, in essence, bet against Tesla stock. And so what's going to happen is that they have to do what's called unwinding their position. So I believe where we are in the Elon Musk short squeeze process is that there's something screwy that happened, which is, I don't know if you noticed, but it was announced that not only did they produce 2,000 vehicles, but the next day Tesla announces, oh, they just registered 4,000 new VIN numbers. And then the the next part after that, like one day later, it was announced that 2,000 new VIN numbers had been registered. Now, what that tells you then is that it's possible that Tesla's now pushed the production numbers from two to something in that 4 or 5,000 units per week zone, which we'll find out more about in the coming week or weeks. But what's happening is all the cash related to those vehicles being sold is now coming to Tesla. And once that cash is in, it means there is no concern about the company going bankrupt or their ability to make their payments. You know, if you do random numbers, 1,000 units at 60K is $60 million. And so if they're doing so you can count the numbers. Let's say if they're doing $250 million worth of new cash coming in on that vehicle a week, that's plenty of cash to support making sure they don't go out of business. So this is horrible news for the short sellers, but if you take the time to maybe watch what I've said a few times, I think you'll find that understanding how this works is going to be helpful because you're going to see volatility in the stock. And I just wanted to encourage you to be aware that you can actually make some really good money being on the positive side of what's going on with Tesla, because it really feels to me like Elon Musk is in a fight to the death with these guys. And I think what you're going to start seeing is higher production numbers than expected, and those numbers forcing the stock price up. And Elon Musk laughing all the way to the bank because he's making money on it. But you, as a savvy viewer of what's going on, will now have an opportunity to make money on this as well. The second part of what I wanted to cover today is what I call crazy prices on repair parts. So the discussion gets kind of interesting. So there are these rules in the auto industry, and one of the rules is, for example, most vehicles, I think, including Tesla, don't make any money until about 100,000 units are sold. Tesla is 15, 20K in, and hopefully they get through into the money-making zone, pretty quickly. So 100,000 is really kind of an interesting deal because it turns out that when you produce 100,000 cars, there are OEMs or original equipment manufacturers that have been making the parts for those cars. The thing about it is, if there were only 5,000 cars sold, a secondary party isn't incentivized to build parts for that car because there aren't enough people around the world who've purchased that car to make it worthwhile. You got to pay tooling costs. There are a whole bunch of costs to prepare to produce. And so I wanted to sort of note all of this to you because, there's this interesting problem showing up, which is one of the manufacturing engineers for Tesla announced that if you look at the Model S on almost a 60 or 90-day basis, in a lot of different ways, there are very few parts that are shared between the cars. And the reason is Tesla is using its vertical integration capability to keep improving the cars on a continuous basis. So this is awesome for the down the road users because they're getting a better car in the process. The nightmare is that once the car is out of warranty, because the parts keep changing so much, even though you have a large number of vehicles that are out there, it becomes very difficult to get parts for your vehicle unless you pay a lot of money. So bottom line is that if Tesla is the only seller of this and Tesla has to manufacture your part based on the VIN number of your Model S or X, there's this disaster on your hands where parts can get extremely expensive. And so I wouldn't be stunned if you're seeing motors and all that stuff. I've seen listings for $6,000 to replace a motor. etc. So if there's any way you can pay for and get the extended warranty as you do your purchase, I think it would be a wise expenditure, because if you have a vehicle that has very few produced of that part, and you have to go to Tesla to get it and they have to make it from scratch, you're going to have sort of a nightmare back end where you're going to have to keep putting very expensive parts into the car. And then eventually the part gets so expensive that it's worth more than the list value of your car. And that's when it has to go to the junker or just become a parts entity where you're just selling parts around the world for the vehicle that you own. So I do think this is sort of a challenge element of being a Tesla owner. A friend of mine who just sold his Model S of 2012 and moved on to a Model 3 was like, he was really looking forward to getting rid of his Model S, not because it wasn't a great car, but just because he was not looking forward to all the expenses related to being out of warranty when so few parts had been produced. So I, one of my goals as we grow older and expand on this channel is to start developing almost a parts and vehicle zone where if you'd like to purchase, like right now I have a couple of owners that um, they're selling their spots in the Model 3 line. So if you guys hit me up on our Facebook page regarding access to earlier versions or an early order of the Model 3, I can maybe introduce you to some of the folks that have vehicles. Many of the S and other owners purchased two vehicles, one that they would get in person and then possibly thinking about selling a second. So I don't think there's any markup, and you get to have your vehicle earlier if that's something that's of interest to you. Anywhere in the world you may be, we can obviously have the car built and shipped to where you'd like. So bottom line is that if you're going to be a Tesla stock owner and owner of a car, highly recommend you start learning about something called option equities, puts and calls, because it just seems to me that Elon Musk is having a fun time trying to figure out how to destroy short sellers. And the process he just went through over the last 10 days is a clear sign that he watches carefully what they're up to, and he enjoys trying to destroy them in the process. So so again, if this is your first time on our channel, please take time to like and subscribe. If you're a repeat visitor, thanks for joining us once again. I wanted to also note that we're on Patreon, Patreon.com/Tesla Advisor. I'll put a link to it. We'd really appreciate if you support us with $1 or $2 a month. It will aid in our doing a better job all around. And I also wanted to sort of dive into a request that you guys tell us. Should we do 1 or 2 ads in our show? If we do no ads, that would be fine as well, but we would definitely need some support on Patreon to allow us to go ad-free. Would love to get your comments and input on this. I also wanted to note that all of you around the world, thank you, Indonesia, Jerry, we've been getting a lot of input, and most appreciate both your viewership and your input. And I have to admit, it's really weird, but it is Sunday. We'd also like to get your input on which day we should do our weekend announcement. I was doing it on Saturday at noon, and our goal was to, most of our viewership is in the United States, but we go global. And what we found was that if I do a Sunday morning post, as I'm doing now, we tend to get more viewers. So I wanted to thank you all for taking time to join us in that regard, and would love to sort of get your survey of what we should consider. Thank you for the comment regarding the correlation to VIN numbers and the number of vehicles produced not necessarily being aligned. That's absolutely correct. I found that to be the case. I think that I want to say part of the reason I wanted to cover all this is what I call the death spiral. And what that means is that if Tesla starts producing 5,000 Model 3s a week, right, you can see how much cash they're bringing in and how things are working. Now, once that happens, until they introduce trucks and how that affects their difficulty of production, Tesla's out of the woods for, Tesla's really out of the woods in terms of potentially losing everything. and therefore all the short sellers that have been waiting for the stock price to fall are done. So I think that keep an eye on the production numbers, but I think once you get past 2,500, Tesla is good to go or in great shape for the next 4 to 5 years, which I think is awesome. Um, Thanks, Jerry, for the comment regarding YouTube notifications. I think all of you can see all the comments that are being made to the side. And I also wanted to note that it's also helpful for you guys to share your thoughts on things we should cover because we're open to ideas of things we should explore or dive into. We try not to do the same topic everybody else does because you can go watch them do their topic and their expertise. And we like to add value to the conversation by covering things that are not as intensely covered by other entities. I also did want to note that there are a bunch of companies, especially CNBC and a bunch of, like I've noticed with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal as well, that there are a lot of very well-heeled individuals that want Tesla to fail. And I just think it's important that we take time out to support an entity that's having, I think, a lot of positive good going on. There's one last thing that I haven't covered. I've covered a little bit, but we'll cover more later, and that is that, Tesla is really into something called virtual power plants. And so the whole idea is if you have a whole bunch of solar panels everywhere, all those solar panels are producing electricity, and so now you have a power plant that's developed. Well, what's interesting is that if you go back and look at it, you'll notice that each of the Model S's, whichever vehicle it is a mini storage facility for power. And we're going to get into the period where, in need of power during the peak time of the day, power companies will start buying the power back from your vehicle in order to use that. So I think, that's kind of interesting. Um, Jerry, I did hear about the Bollinger Off-Road EV. I haven't made a bunch of effort to look into it because, frankly, it takes a lot of time and energy just to cover what's going on with Tesla. But I'm hopeful that there are other EV entities that make progress, and I'm happy to see them do it. Even in the case of Nikola, I'm hoping they succeed because they're adding value at a position where it's needed, which is long-range trucking. So it's not a sort of a negative vibe thing going on at all. So I think I'm going to sort of call it a day at this point. Once again, thanks for taking time out. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Tschüss macht's gut, German. Au revoir, French. Lehitraot, Hebrew. Hoda Hafez, Farsi, as you know. And again, please take time to at least watch one of our ads. We could really use your support on Patreon as well, but the ad viewing is definitely appreciated. And I would love to get your guys' feedback on if and how many ads we should put in so that we, keep you guys we have an agreement and working together well. Greetings from Australia. I do have a number of viewers from Australia. I have to admit, I'm about 5% of our folks that view are from Australia, and I'm really impressed by that, given the fact that Tesla doesn't have the footprint there that it does in Europe and other places. Cool. Well, great that you're on red. Any rate, good deal, Peter, in Australia. Thanks for sort of viewing us. I got a chance to say hello to Jerry, Peter, John, et al. Definitely appreciate you guys taking time out of your Sunday to join us. Look forward to our next conversation as we move into the week. I kind of feel like right now is a great time to buy the Tesla stock, only because the numbers are getting exciting in production, and I think this is going to result in a nice short squeeze that allows everybody to make some really good money. Have a great day, and walk good, enough respect in Jamaican.